6 years ago, I made a video in my parents' backyard that turned into my biggest video ever. 3 NLP techniques you must know. It now has almost, not quite there, almost 600,000 views. Now, 6 years later, do I still think that these 3 NLP techniques are the ones you must know? Well, a lot has happened in that time. Since that time, I've worked with hundreds of clients, and not only have I done a lot of work on myself, my life has changed dramatically since then. And let's not forget that the world has changed quite a bit in just the past few years as well. And I've also gotten a lot better at videos, you might have noticed, since this one 6 years ago. And by the time we're done here, you're going to have the full upgrade on NLP techniques, and I will also answer your questions. Sound good? Are you guys alive out there? Okay, good. Make sure we get some feedback here. I want to make sure that I'm actually live. Okay, good, good, good. All right. Okay. So before we get started, just out of curiosity, would you give a thumbs up in the chat box if the video I'm referring to, the 3 NLP techniques you must know from 2016, was the video that introduced you to my channel? I also posted a link to it here. So give me a thumbs up if that's the first video you found of me and that's how you found my channel. I can't remember. Yeah, that could be the case, especially if you've followed me for a while. Yeah. So for a long time, if you looked up NLP, that video was the first one to come up, and that's why it really launched my channel. Um, and it's surprising because it's not. If you've seen it, the quality of the video is not great. Okay. Well, you might have found me after 2016 because the video was there, it was present. And so it was because it's my most viewed one. It's the one that would normally pop up whenever you would look up NLP. Thank you. Okay. So first, we're going to recap the techniques that I mentioned in the video in 2016, and I'll give you a brief explanation of each. Second, I'm going to tell you whether or not I still recommend you learn the technique that I'm talking about, and if you should make it a priority to master it. And finally, I'm going to introduce you to some new techniques. Now, one more thing before we get started, would you like the instructions for each technique that I'll mention today? Cool. All right. Well, you're in for a real treat. So let's get started. Okay. The video from 2016, the very first technique that I mentioned is calibration. We also refer to it as sensory acuity. Sensory acuity is how you cultivate your ability to pick up nonverbal cues. So these could be eye accessing cues. This could be skin tone changes. This could be shifts in breathing. You can see that in a person's chest or their shoulders rising, but you can also hear it. So these are this is what I'm referring to as sensory acuity. Now, calibration takes it a step further, and it's where you start to see patterns in the way that the person, their nonverbal cues shift. Okay. Now, the reason why I said that this was a technique that you must know is because one of the things that we say in NLP is that everything happens in rapport. Okay. So if you want to influence someone, if you're in sales, if you're a coach, if you're a therapist, the only way you're really going to influence that person is if you first gain rapport with that person, meaning they must feel familiar with you. They must feel like they trust you before they're going to follow you. And when you use sensory acuity skills and you're picking up on the person's nonverbals, the person feels seen and heard on a very unconscious level. And it feels good. It feels good that someone's paying that much attention to us. So rapport is almost imminent. The only time that this doesn't build rapport with someone is usually when someone's trying to hide something, and they can kind of feel that you're looking into them a little bit more, and so then they might try to back away. Now, I understand why this was one of my focuses whenever this was in 2016, like I mentioned. I still had a rather new coaching career, and so it was very important for me to when I would meet people for the first time to gain rapport with them as quick as possible. At this time, I also had an insurance agency, so I was still in sales. So this was really important to me as well to pick up on the nonverbals and to use calibration. Now, this has a few things have happened since then that have changed a little bit though. So first of all, this has become a very natural part of how I deal with anyone. I naturally do these things. I don't really think about them anymore. So I don't really put too much focus. It was funny because when I was making this list and I was revisiting some of these techniques, I was like, wow, that's interesting. This would not be necessarily the most important technique that I would tell someone, but I could understand why it was so important to me at that time. And like I said, because my coaching business was new, I needed to gain rapport with people very quickly, and I was still doing sales, direct sales of insurance, something I really wasn't crazy about. Didn't have a passion for it. And at the time, I was also dating a lot. I'm now married. At the time, I was dating, and that was calibration and sensory acuity skills are very important in dating. You can build rapport with people very quickly that way, and I think that's why it was so important to me then. Now, the other thing that has changed is people usually find me from my YouTube channel, and so when they request coaching from me, they already feel like they're in rapport with me. So whenever I take on a new coaching client, I rarely have to spend any time working on building rapport. And that's just one of those little benefits that I now have. But this is not necessarily so for you as a coach, if you're a coach. So it's worth taking that time to build that rapport. Now, I think I might have mentioned in the video in 2016 about being in rapport with yourself. And you can call it that, but I like to get away from this idea of terms like loving yourself, respecting yourself, because this creates a duality. And this is a discussion for a different video. But really being in rapport with yourself, there is such a thing as calibrating yourself, but I would rather think of it in terms of congruence and how congruent are you with yourself? Meaning, how congruent are your desires, your wants, your actions altogether, your beliefs, your values? Are you acting in congruence with what you value? And that's what we can talk about, like like a rapport with yourself. And so you can calibrate yourself. You can calibrate your own states, and this is an important thing to do. And I think the litmus test, the gold standard for this, is for yourself is to know whether or not you're congruent with your values, and you will feel it when you're not. Something doesn't feel right, and when other people are incongruent or they're saying things. Sometimes you could say that they're. This is what people love to do in NLP is, or they gravitate to NLP because they want to be able to tell when someone else is lying. And they ask me this question like, "Can you tell when someone else is lying?" Well, not always, but if you're calibrating people well, which you might start to notice is how what they're saying does not match up with their voice tonality. What they're saying does not match up with their hand gestures. Like their hand gestures might be really asymmetrical. And that's usually the unconscious trying to reconcile something that's not true. So people might actually be telling you what they believe and what they think, but deep down, unconsciously, it's not true. And their body, their posture, their breathing, their tonality has to reconcile that. So it will seem asymmetrical, it will seem out of place, and you will notice that if your sensory acuity skills are really turned on and you're calibrating, you will be able to notice that. So it's not like the person's necessarily intentionally lying. It just might be that they actually are even deceiving themselves. So you can spot what I would say deception that way. So is sensory acuity and calibration very important to learn? Yes. Um, is it one that I would still recommend be on this list? We'll get to that in a moment. Now, next on the list is anchoring. In the video, I mentioned anchoring. I've even done a video more recently, probably about a year ago, asking the question: Is anchoring even necessary? So I would not necessarily advise using anchoring or relying on it so much anymore. So what is anchoring? Anchoring is basically, it's very Pavlovian. It's very focused on conditioning. If you're in a heightened state of anything, could be pain or it could be pleasure, and you match that heightened state with a touch, with a sound, it could even be something that you see, chances are those two get connected. And when you repeat that sound, or you see the same thing again, or you feel the same touch again, it could just be like a touch on the shoulder, you will go back into that state. And it could be hours later, days later, months, possibly even years later. And this was one of the things that they used a lot in early NLP. In early NLP, a lot of what they were doing, their programming that they were, or the patterns and the models that they were working on, was very much based in like conditioning. And if you've ever listened to Tony Robbins or you've been to one of his seminars, most of his stuff is based on that very classical NLP conditioning. And now, what I've come to find is that this wears off really quickly, and it's not something I like to depend on. And I'll talk a little bit more about what I use now instead of it. What I think is most important is to be aware of anchoring in the natural sense. You walk into a situation and suddenly your state shifts and you don't know why. And it could be a positive thing and it could be a negative state. That's anchoring. Something happened. Something you're matching up with something else anchored, it's anchored to you and it triggered your state. It's good to be aware of this because you want control over your states. Now, in NLP, they say, okay, get control over your states by anchoring the positive states that you want. Okay, that's one way you could do it. I'm not going to argue with and say that you shouldn't do that. It's fine if you do. There's nothing wrong with it. I just find it very unreliable. I don't want to have to depend on like, smacking my hands or something like that to bring about state, which is probably only going to be very temporary. And so that's why I don't rely on it so much anymore. And I certainly don't use it in my coaching anymore. And I'll come back around to what I think is good to replace it with. Now, the third and final technique that I mentioned in the 2016 video is mapping across. And the way I talked about mapping across in the video was in a very only one kind of dimension of mapping across. It's basically where you take a situation where you are very resourceful, you take a situation where you're not very resourceful, and they have to be somewhat similar situations. They can't be too far off. So, for example, if the situation where you're very resourceful, if it's a very physical situation, then you would want to match it up with a situation that the unresourceful situation being that it's very physical as well. You probably want to do it the other way around. So you take a situation where you want to be more resourceful, and then you find a situation where you are very resourceful that's very similar. It could be similar because it's both in your career, could be similar because it's maybe two hobbies you have, and one is they're very similar to each other. So the reason why I say one like being physical, if you're very good at baseball and you're very bad at golf, these would probably work very well for mapping across because they're both physical things and they both have a swinging motion that goes along with it. And so what you're basically doing is you're taking the submodalities of the resourceful situation and applying it to the situation where you're unresourceful to see if it brings in those resources. And a lot of times it works very, very well. But the deeper you go into NLP, what you will find is that mapping across is sort of like the DNA of NLP, because NLP is really started out basically as a model for modeling. And so mapping across is basically that. You take a model, something that you want to be like. It could be a person, a certain success that a certain person is having, and you want to understand what are the process components that make that possible for that person to do that, and then see if you can make a model out of that and transfer it to someone else, and that they can become better at that same thing. That is the basis of all of NLP. That's where they started, and that's what's still going on to this day. Now, the model that I use for pretty much everything now, the self-concept model, in a sense, that is a mapping across model, because what we do is we find out how you create a quality about yourself that you feel very certain about and that you like about yourself. And then we find out what are all the process components of that, the aspects of all of that, and then we map it across to qualities that you want to have, that you want to be certain about, that you feel like you're not very certain about, and then that you want. So you will find mapping across throughout NLP. And so learn it. Don't limit yourself to just submodalities and mapping across one situation to another situation. It has many, many more uses than just that. All right, so let's taking off from there. So mapping across made the list in 2016. Does it make the list in 2022? Absolutely. And for all the reasons that I just mentioned. If you really want to learn NLP, you really need to understand mapping across. And it's okay if you start with the very traditional mapping across, which is mapping across submodalities, but don't stop there. Keep going further and further because you can really literally map across anything from something that is not that great to something that is much better. And this is also why I was talking to Steve Andreas shortly before he passed away, and I said, "Why do you like the word transformation so much?" Because he uses that a lot, and he used it in his book. And uh, so transformation, he liked that word. He used that word a lot, and I knew how precise he was about the words that he used, and so I knew he would have a reason for it. And he said, because transformation is not rebirth, it's not starting all over again. It's taking what is already there and making it better. I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you can map across in your own life, in your own identity. You can take what's working really well, look at what's not working so well, elicit the components, the aspects, the elements of what is working very well, and then apply it to what's not working so well. And chances are it will transform who you are. It will transform that part of your whatever it is that you're working on. And then, like I said, you don't have to limit even to that. You can go to who is somebody who does something very well that I want to be able to do as well. And you can model that. And then you can take those components, those elements, those aspects, and then apply them to yourself and try that. So mapping across it's really starts off essentially for how children model their parents and model other people around them, older siblings, so that they can get the same results, whatever it is that they're getting. It's a very natural process that we do. And you'll find this over and over in NLP that most of what NLP is very natural processes that we already do. But the difference is coding them and becoming conscious of them so that we can have choice about when we use them and where we use them and how we use them. And so that's I can't think of any greater example of that than mapping across. So mapping across made the list in 2016. It absolutely makes the list in 2022. All right, so let's talk about well, I mentioned anchoring, and I kind of gave that one away. I'm not so crazy about anchoring. I think having a great awareness of anchoring is very important. Know how things trigger your states. Become aware of this instead of just reacting through life, getting into situations or meeting people or whatever it is. Somebody might just tap you on the shoulder and suddenly you go into a different state. It's good to be aware of these things. If you feel a sudden shift in your state and you're not sure why, chances are you have an anchor and you got triggered. And this would be something good to do if it's positive as well. It doesn't have to be something that's negative. It's just good to know yourself better. It's good to know what triggers you and what triggers what state. What I'm saying about anchoring is I don't feel the need to set anchors on myself to do all this. And for one reason is I don't feel like the anchors work very well for me. And it's hard to anchor yourself because when you go to anchor yourself, you get yourself in the state, and then the moment you say, "Okay, time to anchor," like I don't know, grab your wrist or touch your shoulder or whatever, you suddenly become self-conscious, and it breaks the state. It's hard to be in a heightened state when you go, "Oh yeah, now it's time to anchor." So what I use now is I wanted my states to be more stable. So the way that I do that is by taking you could take a state like let's say happy, and I would rather transform that into a quality of who I am, because qualities of who you are don't come and go. If there are certain and solid qualities, it's not like This one morning you wake up and you're just not feeling it. It's like, no, you are that. If you believe you are that quality, then it sticks. Whereas a state really comes and goes. Anchoring is an attempt to try to stabilize the state and hold on to it, but even that I don't find works. It works temporarily. But if you are that as a quality, then that's just you wherever you go, isn't it? And I find that to be so much more powerful. So, what would I replace anchoring with if we take that out as doesn't make the list for 2022? What does make the list for 2022? Parts integration. Parts integration I found to be so important and at the same time so unbelievably easy a lot of the time to do if we just take the time to do it. Now, there's something a little bit different called re-imprinting, which is basically when a parts integration doesn't work. Okay, and that's a much more involved process, and I wouldn't call that an easy process. It's involved. It usually gets very emotional. I've done videos about it. I've even done a video demonstration. Parts integration is simply when you've sort of crisscrossed your values. And actually, it's not even that so much about crisscrossing values. It's more about crisscrossing your strategies to fulfill your values. One part is unconscious and one part is conscious. For example, I want to make $1 million next year. Okay. And so I'm gearing up to do that. And then I feel all this resistance. Or I want to lose 20 pounds and I'm gearing up to do that. And then I feel a bunch of resistance. Okay. What most people will try to do is they'll try to just ignore the resistance or power through it. In fact, a lot of personal development tells you to do that. Plow through it, bulldoze through it. Use your willpower, use your discipline, and those things can work for a little while. But eventually, the resistance will catch up with you, and just like a muscle, willpower or self discipline at a certain point will run out, and then you'll resort back to the way things were. You'll go back to doing things the way that they were. Parts integration basically recognizes the resistance. We don't push it away. We invite it. We want to know more about it. Why? Because you can assume and presuppose that that resistance is actually has a positive intention behind it and is trying to fulfill a value for you. Okay. So we want to recruit that part of yourself to help you with everything else in life, right? Because that's what we want. We want wholeness. This is how we experience fulfillment. If we're constantly fighting ourselves for everything that we want, it's not going to be very enjoyable even when we get it. So if we know how to reframe that resistance, find out what its positive intention is, and include it in your pursuit and in your strategy, well, then you're going at your goals as a whole and complete human being, which makes things a lot easier and it makes it a lot more enjoyable. If you're having to postpone gratification entirely as you pursue a goal, something's not right. There should be some fulfillment along the way, and that will give you more motivation to go toward it. And then when you get it, you will feel even more fulfilled, but it's not like you were lacking in fulfillment the entire time. If you're pursuing something and it's just horrible and it doesn't feel good at all the entire way, there's no fulfillment, chances are when you finally get it, if you do achieve it, it's not going to feel, I mean, you'll feel some relief because it's over, but it's not going to feel that great. It's going to be rather empty. So that's a good signal, a good sign to realize that something's not right. When you know it, when you know how to do parts integration, and you feel the resistance, and you invite the resistance, find out what it's really wanting, what it's trying to do for you. You might change your goal and realize because you realize the goal you were after is not really doing it for you, and that's a wonderful thing to know. If you've ever chased a goal for years, only to find out that it doesn't actually fulfill you, it's not a it's not very pleasant. And what happens for a lot of people is they end up quitting because the resistance gets the better of them, and they end up quitting. And instead of acknowledging that, well, maybe that wasn't the right goal for me, we beat ourselves up and we say, well, maybe I'm not good enough and maybe I didn't deserve it. And that's not going to be very helpful either. So know parts integration and master parts integration. So far, the 2022 list for NLP techniques, I would put mapping across, parts integration, and last but certainly not least, in fact, I feel like I'm saving the last for probably what's the most important, and that is values elicitation. Whether you're doing a values elicitation on yourself or you're doing values elicitation for a client, and I mean that if it's sales or coaching or therapy, this is one of the most important things you can possibly do. Now, I talked about, calibration and sensory acuity and how important that is because all things happen in rapport. Values elicitation bumps that off the list of most important. Not that you shouldn't learn calibration and sensory acuity, but values elicitation is more important, and the reason is this: the clearer you are about what you want, the more likely you are to get it. And if you're not clear about what you want, or if you even say, I don't know what I want, there's no amount of NLP that can help you. You have to know what you want. And I hear this a lot. People say, well, I don't know what I want. And I just say, okay, there's something wrong there. You're putting something, you're layering something on top of it, or you're going too far out into the future. Bring it back. You want something right now. You wouldn't be here right now if you were, being on this video right now. You want something. Okay. You might not be completely clear about it, but you start there and say, okay, well, what is it that I want out of this? We always want something. The more clear we are about that, the more likely we are to get it. If you're a coach or a therapist, or even in sales, one of the best things you can do for your client, one of the most respectful things you could do for your client is know very clearly what it is they want. If you're in sales and you know the values that the person has behind what it is that they're looking for, you can sell them anything. Make sure that what you're selling them though actually fits and can fulfill the values that they're looking for. If you don't do that, then you become a really bad and deceptive salesperson. But if you know your client's values and your product or your service lines up with what it is that they value, it's a slam dunk. And they're going to feel good. They're going to feel great about it, and you're going to feel great about it. And the same thing goes as being a therapist or a coach. You're going to help your client so much more when you're very clear about what they want. And lots of times, and this should be the way, you should be more clear about what they want than even they are. And that's how you are really going to help them. Now, for those of you who are not coaches, therapists, or salespeople, this is still the most important thing you can do is elicit your values behind everything that you want. When you are very clear about the values, the generalizations, a value is a generalization about an experience that's important to you. When you know which experience are important to you and and how to fulfill them, or that you want to fulfill them, when you're clear about this, it makes it so much easier. You also have so many more possibilities for doing it. It's not like there's only one goal, and if you achieve that goal, that's the only way you're going to experience. No, no, no. You can find ways to fulfill those values in the simplest of things, but then you will also feel motivated to go for much bigger things because you will sense your potential to go for it. So learn values elicitation, practice values elicitation. I elicit my own values every 3 to 6 months in every major context of my life. And so I get the question sometimes, people say, well, do your values change? Why are you doing it so often? Not really. They pretty much stay the same, but my clarity about them gets sharper and sharper. Not only that, it takes about 3 to 6 months of living life, gathering more data and information in my experiences so that I can then see how that matches up with my values. Am I really aligning with my values? Can I do this even better? Most of the time, that's yes. So it's about getting sharper. So do values elicitation, and that alone will change your life. In fact, I've told people you can make an entire coaching practice just out of eliciting people's values and helping them align their strategies and their behavior to their values to get what they want. Entire coaching practice just out of that. Now, I like to go much deeper. I like to go into transformation at the identity level and take it, 10 miles deeper than just being clear. But everything starts in the clarity about what you want. For your clients, everything starts in the clarity about what they want. Imagine the kind of salesperson you could become if you were always clear about what your clients' values are regarding what it is that you're selling, whatever that context is. For me, it was insurance. And when I started doing this and I started going deeper with my clients and finding out, well, what is it you really want in your insurance? What's important to you about that? They had never been asked these questions before. And we just kept going deeper and deeper. And then as soon as I really understood that, what they valued, I'd say, "Hey, I got this thing over here, and it lines right up with what you're looking for." And when that conversation came together like that, somebody always bought something from me. Now, I used it in dating. I used it with my wife. I didn't even tell her what I was doing, but I elicited her values, and I wanted to see if I felt like we were really compatible. So this was early on when we were dating, and I really realized that yes, this was going to work out very well. So using her values, I mingled them with my values and created a vision of where we could go with our relationship. And she loved it, and I know for sure that that had a huge effect on the longevity of our relationship. And so, if you're a husband and a wife, or a wife and a wife, and or a husband and a husband, or a boyfriend and girlfriend, whatever your situation is, and you're in a long-term relationship, let me just say it that way, and it's important to you, the longevity of your relationship is important to you, eliciting each other's values around what's important to you in a relationship, and then using those values to create a vision of where you go forward. I just can't even begin to explain to you how powerful that is for a relationship. And your values don't need to be the same. That's not what I'm saying here. They need to be compatible, and your strategies need to be compatible, and they need to be able to work together. You can't. Nobody's going to be 100% just like anyone else. That's not what we're after in a relationship. But what we are after is compatibility. Can they get their values met, fulfilled in this relationship alongside mine at the same time? And if you can, most of the time you can. One way to really put that together is to create a vision together, and it's a very powerful and amazing thing to do. All right. So the three techniques of the upgrade 2022: values elicitation, parts integration, and mapping across. I'm going to give you one more bonus, and that's the swish pattern. Now, the swish pattern is kind of interesting. The reason why I'm giving it as a bonus and not like as one of the top three priorities is because I don't really use the swish pattern very much on myself, and I don't use it very much with clients because it had a tendency to use. Well, the swish pattern is really best for things that are habitual, things that you feel very like a compulsion, you can't stop yourself. But there's a lot to learn from the swish pattern. And in the swish pattern was the pattern that inspired Steve Andreas, my mentor, to create the self concept model. And it was, I didn't think much about the swish pattern until I found that out. And I was like, okay, well, there must be more to this pattern that I hadn't noticed, I wasn't seeing. And there's so much to it, and I use pieces of it from time to time. The main thing with the ideal image of yourself being an image of you, the you who is fulfilling your highest ideals, who has solved all of your problems, and it's an image where you're not doing any particular behavior, and you're not in any particular context. It's a little difficult and a little tricky to make an image that way, but when you do, that becomes your north star. And it is amazing. So you don't necessarily need to have a bad habit or a compulsion that you need to break. If you just make that ideal image of yourself that we use in the swish pattern to swish up to break the pattern of a bad habit, if you just have that alone, that becomes like your compass, right? And it's also like a GPS. And it's we have maps sometimes. I think of strategies a lot like maps. We have a map, and if you think about like a two-dimensional paper map that could easily go outdated, right? Back, I'm old enough to remember using those, driving around with paper maps in my hand, trying to find where I'm going, and sometimes it's outdated. That's a lot how a lot of us are going about this. But when you have that ideal image of yourself, it basically rises above all of those things, and it says, "This is who I want to become." And because there's no behavior in the ideal image and there's no context, then I become extremely flexible and adaptable to any situation. I know where, like I said, the North Star is. I know what my compass says. My compass says it's in this direction. Sure, the terrain might not be something I recognize, but I can overcome that terrain because I know where I need to go. You might recognize very familiar terrain and still not know the direction you want to go in, and that will hold you back. So you want to always have something that rises above the terrain that is your ideal. And the only way it can rise above the terrain is if, in that ideal image of yourself, you're not doing any particular behavior and you're not in any particular context. So I would practice the swish pattern for that alone to create that ideal image of yourself and have that be your direction. Okay, before I answer questions, as I said, uh, I asked you if you wanted instructions on each one of these techniques. You said yes. In the description of this video, right below this video, you will see a list of all of these techniques, and um, you can access PDFs for all of them. We'll email them to you. Okay. All right. I see a lot of comments have come through. Let me roll back a little bit here and see. So Lonnie says self-concept databases seem like a better way to anchor. A database can serve as one in all modalities, some modalities, and it's better just anchoring state. Absolutely. What she's talking about there is having those grounded, solid qualities of whatever state it is that you want. That is so much more stable than using anchors. All right, let's see. Can we have parts that should be integrated and kept separate? Not be integrated and kept separate. I've never seen a case like that. We are always going to be better when we're integrated. Integration, I've never seen any negative that comes out of integration. It's fine to know, like, you know, we make categories is what we do. We do that about ourselves. We do that about the world around us. That's okay. That doesn't mean that a category necessarily separates two things so that they're opposing each other. So it's fine to categorize things and know the difference between day and night, even though, right, they're linked. They're part of one process. But it's okay to know the difference. But inside of us, when we have two parts and they're pulling against each other or they're conflicting, this is never going to work good for you. This is always going to be a problem. So we always want to integrate those parts. Found acknowledging the resistance powerful. Lots of info there. Yeah, and don't stop there. Don't just stop at acknowledging the resistance. See, would that be a congruence check? Yeah, when you check congruence, and if you feel like you're out of congruence, then you know that there's a part that's resisting, or it's not going along with everything else, and so that would be a good time to do a parts integration. You're welcome. Okay. Let's see, when you say that if your profession is your passion, so you make progress and feel better, in what category you put it? Is this calibration, unconscious mapping across, or what you say? I'm not sure I quite understand your question. When you say that if your profession is your passion, make progress and feel better, in what category you put it? Is this calibration, unconscious? Um, well, I would say what I was probably referring to there is congruence. And so here's the thing too, like, I know plenty of people who have jobs and who have businesses that they're fine with. It's not their passion, but they're successful at it and they don't mind it. So that's fine. Like, I won't argue with that at all. For me, it's difficult to do a job that I don't feel passionate about, and that's just me. So, I worked really hard many years to finally put myself in a position. Well, first of all, I had to know what I was really passionate about and really what I really liked. I had no idea that I'd be doing what I'm doing today, or that I enjoyed it so much. I had a kind of a hint a few times that teaching was important to me, that I really enjoyed teaching when I taught bartending. When I was a bartender, and I really enjoyed the teaching part of it. Bartending, it was fine, but the teaching part of it was great. So um, I think there are plenty of people who can be congruent working jobs that they're not passionate about, and that's fine. There's no reason. Not everybody has to be a business owner or self-employed. I don't think that everyone should be that. I don't think everybody would be happy doing that. A jujitsu NLP session? Not sure what that would look like. Okay. Yeah, don't create an ideal image of yourself eating strawberries unless you want to become. Okay. What if I want to make a big change in an area of my life? I do value solicitation. You can't make the move. So, I'm assuming that when you say can't make the move, you're saying there's a certain strategy that you cannot execute. So if you know what the values are, that should give you more possibilities for other strategies. So here's what I say. Be willing to throw a strategy out at any time if it's not working. Even be willing to throw your goals out at any time if you feel like they're not fulfilling you or the pursuit of them are not fulfilling you. But never, ever, ever quit on your values. There's always a way when you're focused on your values. There's always a way to fulfill your values. And I'll give you an example of the most extreme case that I can think of. Viktor Frankl was put in a concentration camp, and he decided two things. No one could take his freedom away from him, and no one could take his happiness away from him. Two values, freedom and happiness. Even though he was under the most restrictive situation that any of us could ever imagine, he decided within himself if he was going to be happy, and if he was, and that was freedom to him, that ability to make that choice. He's like, they can take my external freedom, and they did, and they took his wife, his family, his money, his profession from him, took everything from him externally. But he said they can't take what I do inside. They can't take my decision making away, and they can't take my happiness away. So he became very creative in how he was going to fulfill those two values. And so if he can do that in a concentration camp, we can fulfill our values with what we have right now. And what happens is it might, Tatiana, you might not be able to execute the strategy that you really want to execute on because of, whatever's going on in your life. But that doesn't mean that you can't fulfill those values. And it doesn't mean that there's nothing you can do. And what happens is when you still act on those values, you still, you do what you can. It's amazing how that potential starts to part the way and open up more and more possibilities. And so what will likely happen for you is eventually you will get to that point where you can um, do that strategy, or you might realize that wasn't the right strategy either. That by the time you started doing all this work, you find a better strategy. But the thing is to never ever quit on your values and always be thinking, how do I fulfill these values? And how can I do that right now with everything that I have? It's not the easiest thing, but make that a practice and things will open up in your life like you can't imagine. The worst thing that we can do is to wait. The worst thing we can do is say, well, I can't do this because of something else, some other person or some other external something or another. And so we wait. That is the worst thing to do is wait. You can always do something now. All right. A part of me says, yeah, but staying where I am also has some good values, parts integration, and still stuck. What if a habit pattern keep changing? How do I know to move on or stay? Again, it just goes back to just getting more and more clear about your values. And getting clear about your values is not just doing a value solicitation on a piece of paper. You can't work all of this stuff out on paper. Some things you're going to have to go and take some action on. Some of these things you're going to have to take action on knowing that they're likely to fail. Sometimes you have to do things to fail to know, okay, what is the way that doesn't work so that I can start looking in other directions. You just got to keep trying. You got to keep trying different things. But here's the thing too, is like that might sound like it's a really frustrating process. It doesn't have to be. If it's all about just getting there and getting to the destination, then yeah, that can be very frustrating. But think of it more as a discovery. Think of it more as you're curious about what's going to work here and what's not going to work. So get curious and discover. Like when I hear people say, "Well, I don't really know what I want to do." Okay, well, then that's your want. Your want is to discover what it is you really want. What is it you really want to do? And that doesn't have to be a painful process. In fact, why would you want it to be? Or like why would you approach it that way? But a lot of people do. Go into that discovery process and enjoy it. Have fun with it and discovering what it is you want and discovering more of yourself along the way. And I take that approach with everything that I do. Even though I do get frustrated with a lot of things that I'm going after, I tend to be rather ambitious, so I go after these big things, and I get frustrated. But then I have to keep stepping back and reminding myself, this is discovery, and if I'm not enjoying this, I need to check myself. Does it not align with my values? Or is my approach only focused on getting there and achieving rather than what my values really are? So it's hard. It's especially hard to do it on yourself, but you can. So with the switch pattern, how do you personally invoke or access it? Um, I'm not sure what you mean by that. Just follow the instructions. Let's see. I've tried values integration dozens of times on myself and others, and it never comes to a satisfactory conclusion. When do you stop, and how do you know to stop? I think you mean values elicitation, unless you mean parts integration. I'm not sure which. Yes. Okay. The second comment, values elicitation. So I'm not sure what you mean by a satisfactory conclusion, because I don't really feel like a values elicitation is anything conclusive. It's more about clarity. It's like, okay, you think about 10 years ago, the things that you weren't clear about that you're more clear about now. There's plenty of things, right? Or you think about 20 years ago. I mean, just the more you live life and you have experience, the more clarity you have about certain things. Now, does that mean that you've reached a satisfactory conclusion? No. I mean, there's always more clarity. There's always more to learn, right? You might have arrived at a place where you're satisfied and you say, okay, I'm not interested in exploring this anymore. But then that in itself is kind of a satisfactory conclusion. You've come as far as you want to go. But there is always more to learn. There's always more clarity. I feel like values elicitation is an open valve. You can always shut it off. And I think many people do, unfortunately, and they become bitter in life, closed off, don't want to do anything more. Keep that valve open. Your values light the way in a dark world. They light your path in a dark world. And there's always more clarity to be gained. So just keep going. And then what I do with values though, when I'm coaching myself or I'm coaching clients, is we take the values and we actually cross-reference them to whether or not they're showing up as certain and solid qualities of your identity. And if they're not, then that's a problem. That's what's creating lowered self-esteem. That's what's creating a sense of a lower sense of what your potential is, what you're capable of. And then when we transform these qualities, then it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy, because you believe you are, you believe you can, and you believe you can do it, and you do. And even when you fail, you just go, okay, that was a failure. That's not going to stop me, because this is who I am, and I just do it. All right. When the ideal image becomes a visual, and there always seems a context, time, modality, I'm confused. Yeah, you want to remove that. So um, you can imagine yourself doing something that you're pretty good at. Like if you were to do that right now, like let's say maybe you're pretty good at playing a musical instrument, or maybe you're pretty good at giving talks. Maybe you're pretty good at horseback riding. I don't know. And if you see yourself doing that, okay, we're going to go ahead and allow you to have behavior right now. If you see yourself doing that, and there's probably a context there, wipe out that context. Use like a green screen, or you can just like a black curtain, almost as if you were on a stage. See yourself doing that same activity, but now the background is completely wiped. There's nothing there. When you do it like that, what feels different? All right, because this is going kind of long and we're doing a little mental exercise, I'll give you the answer. Oftentimes when you do that, it will give you the feeling that whatever that activity is, you can do anywhere. When you remove the context, and you see yourself doing that activity, it feels like, oh, well, I can do that anywhere. So the less content you have, the more it will generalize to every area of your life. So your ideal image, if it's the ideal you, and you can see that there's something about that image of yourself that represents your ideal, and you're not doing any particular behavior, so you're not limited by the behavior, you're not limited by whatever thing it is that you might have associated with this, and there's no particular context. This will generalize to every area of your life, everywhere you go, whatever you do. It's a piece of identity work. That's what makes it so powerful. All right. Any methods you use to gain more clarity? Values elicitation, without a doubt, and then taking action. What is a good way to develop sensory acuity skills daily, picking an aspect at a time and focusing on it by observing it until it becomes natural and then move on to the next? Yes. And we have a sensory acuity program. It's a 30-day thing that we email to you. It's in the description below. So, yeah, that's where I would start. But it never really ends. You want to keep going beyond the 30 days. Another thing that we teach in our coaching program is boundaries. And when you understand boundaries and how to use your boundaries, if you basically put people inside of your boundaries, you will instantly have a sense of rapport with them, which usually they'll mirror that back. And also, you start to really notice that nonverbal communication. Because when you're in rapport with someone, believe it or not, it's usually not very conscious for people, but you're communicating on a nonverbal level as well. And so when you learn how to work with your boundaries, that becomes very powerful. I went through the PDF a while ago and I might have gone too fast that at the end I didn't know where to start when trying to practice it. What are we talking about here? Oh, you talking about sensory acuity? If you're talking about sensory acuity, yeah, I mean it's an ongoing practice, but I would also incorporate the boundaries work. The boundaries work makes all of the sensory acuity stuff a lot easier. Let's see. What feels different? There's no pressure. Oh, I think you were talking about when you remove the context. It usually feels like it frees you to basically be able to do that same behavior anywhere you go, or yeah, behavior. Sensory acuity thing. Yeah, I mean it's an ongoing thing. The sensory acuity stuff is something you keep working on. It's a sensitivity that you create where you just pick up on all of this nonverbal communication. Robert Greene talks about it a lot too. Unfortunately, he doesn't give you any techniques. He just says it's really important. You should pay attention to it. It's like, yeah, I know that. What do you use to do that? But anyway, I've gotten mine to a level where I'm really happy with. I think I was always like Sherlock Holmes. He would just look at someone and be able to say all kinds of things that's true about them just by observing them. And I was always fascinated by that. And when I came across NLP and they were doing something similar, I jumped right on that. So when trying to implement mapping across or parts integration anywhere on yourself, does your surrounding matter? Like seating in a meeting at an event and triggers are happening. Well, I wouldn't try to do these things while I was in the middle of something. If you're going to do mapping across or you're going to do parts integration, take time where you're not going to be disturbed and you can actually work on this and do it. Because if you're in the middle of something and you're trying to do this, I mean, I'm not gonna say that you can't make it work, but it's just not the right time. Give yourself some space and some time to do these processes. This medium isn't great for interaction. It's better if you could come to my house. Okay, yeah, I'll be right there. All right. Well, did you guys like this? I haven't done a live like this in a very long time, and I'm open to doing more of them if you like them and if you'll show up to them. As you might have noticed, I do fewer videos now. I'm working on trying to make each video a lot better, trying to make the best possible videos I can make, which means they take longer to make. And that's an unfortunate part of it because I like to put more content out there and I like to have more contact with my audience. And unfortunately, when you work really hard on videos, it's just hard to do that. So maybe doing more lives like this would be a way to sort of supplement that. Okay. Well, I really appreciate that you showed up. Like I said, take advantage of those instructions in the description. I also do one-on-one coaching. We also have a group coaching program. So all things that I notice some of you are already involved in. And if you want to get involved, if you want to take part in any of these, you know how to find me. You know how to find these things. Feel free to ask me any questions. And yeah, just love doing this stuff. It's a lot of fun. Okay, take care, everybody. Have a great rest of your week, and I'll see you on the next live or on the next video.